My dad fought in World War II, and I remember very clearly from the moment I was able to remember anything, about 5 years after I was born, his profound distress, I would say, over some of the racism that was displayed in the course of that war, even among our own troops. Profound dismay. He spent his life as a teacher and a leader of school systems. He spent his life trying, as these folks have succeeded, in his own small way, to make sure that there was social justice. It's quite wonderful. It's amazing to see all of you here and to see these wonderful people on this panel who have been leaders for social justice during their long lives, and especially to recognize Bob Fitch, the great photographer, the documenter of much of these movements, and to welcome you to the exhibit, which is downstairs. We'll go down there after this panel discussion, and I hope you all get a chance to see Bob's great photos. The Fitch archive is huge. Over 200,000 images taken over 40+ years. He has documented social movement for progress, civil rights, equal justice, freedom, for all those years. And this archive is now accessible to anyone who wants to come and make good use of them, these images, in our Department of Special Collections. We're proud to have it. This collection, this Fitch archive, is a record, photographic record, of the history of social justice in our country that includes the great leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Pete Seeger, Dorothy Day, David Harris, and many, many more. The images in this archive are evidence of movements for change and progress, for civil rights, by everyday regular people, for working people, and for everyday people, working people. The archive has been made available digitally, some of it. Whoops, I skipped a page here. The archive contains powerful documents and reminders of the people and events of the civil rights movements. These photos are a tangible record of how and why so many of us are here today. And these struggles continue. They ought to continue. Fitch began his career as a photojournalist in roughly the mid-60s. But he became systematic in his quest to document the leaders of these movements, the people in the movements, following the assassination of Dr. King. From those sad and horrible moments, he undertook the continuation of his earlier work, but with a clearer mission. As he relates in the catalog to his Fitch photographic archive here at Stanford, I quote now, "By reviewing the full archive of my work at the Stanford University libraries, you may discover that the years have been surprisingly fulfilling. This 74-year-old has documented peace and social justice campaigns into the 21st century. There are a number of people here today that should be acknowledged. Bob Fitch and his archive were first introduced to us by Ignacio Ornelas. Ignacio introduced Bob to Roberto Trujillo, head of our Special Collections program. Roberto, where are you? Stand up. And Roberto subsequently called into this effort his fellow curators, Ben Stone, who's curator for British and American history, and Adán Griego, curator for Latin American and Mexican American collections. These curators quickly engaged a larger team here to work on the acquisition and then on this great exhibit and the catalog. We've had people from our Digital Library Systems and Services group who've worked to make selections from the archive available digitally. I want to mention Tony Navarrete and Kathy Astor particularly. The Department of Special Collections has had a working team within its manuscripts division featuring Glenn Edwards, Peter Chan, Ignacio Ornelas, and so forth. We are proud to be the home of the Fitch Archive and proud of the work of these good people in the Stanford Library who have accomplished much to make it accessible, both in the exhibit and forever, as one of our most special collections. We have enjoyed and continue to enjoy strong support from our faculty for interest in this whole spectrum of events and people, and in this collection in particular. So I want to mention Clay Carson, Albert Camarillo, James Campbell, David Kennedy, all from our history department, and from Ramon Saldivar from the English department, and Jose David Saldivar in Comp Lit, comparative literature. The exhibition and catalog was curated and edited by Roberto Trujillo, Ben Stone, and Becky Fishback, with assistance from many others. The exhibition itself and the catalog were designed and brought to life by Becky Fishback. And Becky, as is her custom, has done a spectacular job. I think we all owe Becky a round of applause. So let me introduce briefly the members of this panel that are sitting before you. First, and in the center, is Bob Fitch. He's come here with some of his family, a lot of his friends. His work is magnificent. He comes to us from Watsonville. The Reverend Tom Gilmore, members of his family, have come from Alabama. Thank you all for coming. David Harris, draft resistor, activist, author, former student body president, person who spent some time in prison for his refusal to be drafted. David Harris. SABINO LOPEZ. Former president of the Ranch Committee for the United Farm Workers Union. He's been training and advocating for farm workers' rights since 1970. He's been a leader for our folks on the farm. Thank you very much for being here. And to my immediate right is Professor Jim Campbell, whose work is all over this era and these themes. He's going to be the moderator for this panel. Be gentle with him. He's a young man, but we love him anyway. So immediately after this panel, and there'll be time for questions and answers and conversation, we're all going to go downstairs to the rotunda, the Munger Rotunda on the second floor. Take this very slow elevator, or there's a stairwell over here. Go down there. We've got some snacks and some drinks and time for us to take a look at the fantastic exhibition of these photographs. And this catalog, which Becky has made, will be on sale at a special price, tonight only, downstairs. Now, Jim?
To reflect on a photograph. These are 4 of the photographs that are in the collection, that are in the, also in the book that we hope that you'll walk away with today. And we thought that these might be a kind of inspiration for them to talk a little bit about their lives and their journeys. And then what we hope to do is to just throw this open as quick as we possibly can. So in that spirit, let me introduce everyone briefly and then sit down. As has been mentioned to you, the occasion that we are here primarily reflects the extraordinary generosity of Bob Fitch, a person who has spent, and one doesn't hear this very often, more than 60 years in the struggle for social justice in this country. From his days as a teenager in Berkeley, California, where he was deeply influenced by local socialist and communist movements, right up to the present. In 1965, shortly after leaving seminary, and all of this is, I should say, is brilliantly and quite movingly recounted in his preface to the catalog. Shortly after leaving seminary, he volunteered as a worker with Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He spent the better part of 2 years crisscrossing the South with King and others, documenting their efforts in voter registration. In particular, he very movingly produced a series of photographs for Martin Luther King's funeral in 1968, and he just kept going. He produced, as has already been noted, an extraordinary archive not only of the Black freedom movement, but of the struggle of farm workers here, particularly of the United Farm Workers of America, of anti-war organizing in California and here on the Stanford campus, included organizing work by the Catholic Workers Movement, by the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, by the West Coast Sanctuary Movement, of which he was one of the primary organizers. He has literally given his heart and soul to this, up to and including recent work with the California Department of Housing to develop affordable housing in rural communities. His generosity in not only donating over 200,000 pictures to this university, but doing so, I mean, maybe there's more fine print to this than I'm aware, but I think the fine print is that there is no fine print. These photographs are accessible to the public. For those of you who wish to use them in your own social justice campaigns, you are welcome to do so. And that is that is just, I can't even tell you, those of you who work in libraries will know how utterly unusual that kind of generosity is. We will then have three people who are products of the movements and architects, organizers within the movements that the Fitch collection documents. We will begin with a short statement from Reverend Thomas E. GILMORE, who is the pastor of the First Baptist Church Ensley in Birmingham, Alabama, where he has been for the last 30 years. In 1971, he had the distinction of being the first black person elected sheriff of Greene County, Alabama, only the second in the state of Alabama. He has the rare distinction of having had a movie made about him, starring Lou Gossett. Some of you may have seen it. He was born in Greene County, Alabama, but was actually living in California in the early 1960s, including, I think, in 1963, when the four girls died in the Birmingham church bombing. But he came back in 1965 to Alabama, and shortly after his arrival, while getting a gallon of milk at a gas station, was assaulted by local police, by the local sheriff and his deputy, who suspected him of civil rights activity, not least because he had a California license plate on his car. That movement was extremely ill-advised by the sheriff and his deputy. It drew him deeply into the work of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he would, in 1966, as a 24-year-old, run for sheriff of Greene County. He would, because of voting irregularities, be defeated, but in 1970 he would win that office. He would earn a reputation as the sheriff who would not carry a gun, a reputation that flowed from his deep commitment to nonviolent activism. After listening to Reverend Greene, and you'll see which photo is of him, we will hear from SABINO LOPEZ, who is the Deputy Director of the Center for Community Advocacy in Salinas, California, an organization with which he has worked since its creation in 1990. A farm worker himself, he also spent decades working as an organizer and representative of the United Farm Workers of America, working in particular around issues related to legal access and housing. He is a member of the Salinas City Planning Commission, the Monterey County Housing Advisory Committee, and the Safe Housing Committee in Watsonville, California. He is also, and here's a Stanford connection for you, on the board of directors of the National Steinbeck Center, the first farm worker to play that role, and I would like to think Steinbeck would be pleased. And our final speaker in this preliminary round of kind of opening remarks will be David Harris. David Harris attended high school in Fresno, California, and in the fall of 1963, he enrolled at Stanford, where he both witnessed and contributed to this university's transformation from a sleepy provincial school into, well, something else entirely. He was involved in politics like so many of his generation, deeply moved by the Black freedom struggle. He was involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and briefly traveled to Mississippi. In 1966, as student body president of Stanford, he became deeply involved in what was then a seemingly quixotic and much persecuted movement to end the war in Vietnam. He refused to cooperate with the selective service system and urged others to do the same. He declined to flee to Canada. He was arrested, convicted of draft evasion, and spent a considerable amount of time in federal prison. I think, in fact, and Becky's corrected me on this, I think in the book we say 15 months, and I actually believe it was closer to 25 months. Am I right? 20 months. You know, that may seem like a distinction without a difference, but I reckon 5 months in a federal prison is a meaningful block of time. Since that time, he has become a writer of extraordinary distinction. He's produced many books ranging in topics from the National Football League to the Iran crisis of 1979. For present purposes, the two that are most vital and the two that I think belong on all of our shelves. One is a book about Vietnam called Our War, What We Did in Vietnam and What It Did to Us. And the other, Dreams Die Hard, a deeply moving, thought-provoking, wrenching memoir of his years here at Stanford. So it is my great pleasure again to welcome all of you and to welcome our speaker, Mr. Fitch.
My mic on?
You may sit if you prefer.
Well, I learned from some brilliant preachers that you want to be close to the people. Howdy. I want to say something very important first. It's tremendous to be acknowledged for one's work, to have it reproduced globally. There is a greater honor, and that is that those who know one, who have been someone's neighbor, who have been someone's family, children, and lover, who know someone's moments of genius and their warts and their flaws, to come forward and be here with me tonight. This is a very, very special honor. Thank you. As I look across this gang, I know that of the images that will be placed on the web, probably finished in about 3 months, half of the people in this room will be on that website. You can look up your own name. Which brings up a kind of side topic. I've never done a personal exhibit before. And the reason for that is personal exhibits tend to glamorize just the artist, not the team. What's the team that makes it possible? You're seeing some seated here in their photographs. You've met Roberto and Ben, Becky. You know your own ways of participating in the peace and social justice and wars against bigotry and poverty. So this is not about Bob Fitch. This is about us. All the press that opened their pages, all the little things we did from address letters to make phone calls, all the things we've done of knocking on doors hour after hour after hour. This is an honor for us. And Stanford, by virtue of being one of the, looking for the word, prominent archives of original materials on the earth, has canonized our work. It exists, and it will be repeated again and again and again. So my thanks to you for allowing me to be us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. You've done a great job. I'm tempted to do as Bob did, come down and stand, but I'm an African-American black pastor, and we don't preach short sermons. So I best stay here. I don't get a chance to preach in my seat often, and I'll take this privilege. It brings great joy to my heart to be here with my friend Bob Fitch and his great work, and my new friends at Stanford. And Becky, has been wonderful to be in touch with me and to put a face on Stanford for me. And I'm pleased to be here. My family has joined me, or portions of my family has joined me. My daughter, Angela, my son, Andrew, next to my youngest son. My third son from the top, Ronald, who was born in Los Angeles, California. And he is the one that I was headed to get the milk for the formula that was talked about. My friend from my home, actually only one of my sons was born in Greene County. My oldest son was born in Greene County. But I have with me here another friend who lives here with you in this area, Dr. Sam McAlpin, who was born in Greene County. If you would wave to us, Brother Sam. Good to have you. And his daughter is with him. I have my friend who he and his wife was probably the first white family that came to work with me in Greene County, Alabama. And I still don't say his last name as he does, Paul Bakulich. He is with me here. Paul, my Lord. His daughter and son is here as well. I'm grateful for my family. I grew up in my grandmother's home, and she gave me a part of her faith, and I've been blessed to have her faith and her family name and born on a family plot, that she would remind me that her great-grandfather, Joe Wynn, came out of slavery and bought that property and gave it to Lewis, his son, who gave it to his daughter Charlotte, who gave it to her. And I was reminded that I was connected, very connected. And she would encourage me to be responsible. But great family, great community. Greene County is in my heart deep. And a great movement. I would not be here, and I would not know Brother Bob Fitch or Paul Bakulich had it not been for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the great movement that we were blessed with in the 50s and the 60s where I was involved. And here is a 24-year-old me, and I look forward to being that way again one day. I do believe in heaven. And I'm leading a demonstration of probably about 40 people. Headed to take, I promised this kid, among others, I was going to take them to one of the white schools. And we got, and I thought we would have this kind of confrontation. But I actually didn't expect to have such a big one. The sheriff and his family had been in power for 54 years. And he had a reputation of being a star football player for the University of Alabama, and so on and so on. And he told us, this is it. You don't go any further. And this kid and a couple of others said, hey, you promised us that you were going to take us to the school. And so I got the kids behind me and the sheriff in front of me. Thank God for other friends. Bob with his camera, who saved me a lot of problems, because the sheriff is not going to be too bad with those cameras around. But even more than that, one of the leaders came and said, hey, let's go back and reorganize. And that was the best voice I heard in a long time. I got back. But it was, among the other things, the sheriff did pounce on me another time and made my mind up to run and seek that office. One of my friends said to me, I know how to stop police brutality. And I said, well, I wish you'd tell me and show me how. He said, you be sure. And I was for 12 years. 12 years, 3 terms. And I'll never do it again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Myself? So soon. My name is SABINO LOPEZ, and I cannot tell you, I was born and raised in Mexico, my town Ameca, Jalisco. 7 brothers and sisters, and my father was one of the first braceros who came to the United States to work in the fields. So he came to work everywhere. I recall his stories about being in Chicago, Denver, Colorado, different cities that I don't know. But he ended in Salinas, California, working in the fields. So 1960, he got his legal residence. Then, meanwhile, we were in Mexico and doing our own stuff for the family, growing our own corn and tea, everything in our town. So I was in the elementary school when my father told me, when one of the times he went to my town, He said, son, we need to go to the United States. I was not expecting to come, let me tell you. People say, people want to come, but I didn't want thinking nothing about the United States. But my father told me we need to go there because I applied for your legal residence, and you have an appointment now in Calexico. So now you have to go to El Norte. I was in my 6th grade in school, very, very late. I was 17 years old, and then I came with my father to Salinas to work in the fields, and we ended up living in a labor camp. And then I was really disappointed because and the labor camp used to be for braceros, the single farm workers that used to come the World War II when you didn't have so many workers, so they start bringing us from Mexico. Now they don't know what to do with us, but we are here. And so then the next day, I was one of the youngest in the labor camp because most of them were under my father's age. So I felt like the youngest in the whole, I used to say old people, but now we're too old. And seeing them, cooking, making their lunch at 4 o'clock in the morning because we need to start at 4 o'clock. At 6 o'clock in the fields, but we need to prepare our lunch and everything. So I wake up, my father said, okay, son, you are in the United States, in this life we need to work, to live and to make our own food and everything. You need to learn to do everything here. So, okay, I was accustomed to under my mom to do everything. So when I have to cook, you have to cook. So then the supervisor came in the pickup and took us to the fields. And my first job was the tinning hoy. This job, I was thinking myself, I was 17 years old, and my first job is to work 8 to 10 hours working in that position. We were making $1.05 per hour, and used to work at least 6 days per week. And Sunday we do something else, but I started, this was my first job. I think so that this job is one of the lowest paid jobs in the agriculture. I think so in agriculture there are different levels. This is one of the lowest levels to start. To start your job, you want to start working in the fields, and this is the first job you need to learn, used to do. Now it's longer, but not used to be shorthand. And I recall, working. I heard I felt like I was really suffering. I said, "Oh my God, this is the United States." Can't believe it. I was better in Mexico than here. I couldn't believe how so many people and families are working like that, and also other younger people like me working in the fields too. But then there were so many injustices in the field. So basically, no benefit, no nothing. It's just we were treated really bad. We didn't have any respect. We were all the time I've been saying, they saw us as tools only, not as a human being, not as people with brains. I've been saying, I felt like I was a tool with no brains. They saw us like nothing. So from those feelings, feeling like that, I went one time to make my income tax. We pay taxes, remember. My father paid taxes all the time, and he told me, you need to do your report, and we need to pay more money, so you need to do your income tax. And I recall I went to the main street in Salinas to do my report, and one of the guys who was helping me told me, I can't believe it, you're working 95 hours per week. You didn't have overtime. You don't have nothing, vacation, holidays, nothing. Just only 105 per hour. He told me it's unfair. It's a Latino guy who was making my income tax. Of course, in those years I didn't speak a word in English, so you don't understand me. I'm sorry, but it's the best I can do. So he told me, but it is a man that is working to improve the farm worker condition and dignity. So this is a name, say, Cesar Chavez. Will come to Salinas. I think it was because I came 1966 in Salinas, so I think it was in 1966, 67. And I said, oh, hey, we need this guy, because we need to do something, because the way we're living and paid and treated, I think we didn't deserve it, We need to do something as farm workers to prove that we have brains were as smart as anybody else. We're not here only because we want to get your money and spend your taxes. We're here to work and to do our own living, and we deserve it. I decided we need to show we have a power, we have a voice, we can do it. And si se puede, claro. Then 1970, when they started the struggle, then the Teamster Union started signing contracts with the company, the growers. We didn't want to sign with the Teamsters and growers, and it wasn't a struggle between the fields before the 70s. So we were struggling before that because we didn't want Teamster, we want Cesar Chavez Union. We didn't know this guy because he never showed up. We were in Salinas. I think we were on a different phenomena happen. The farmers, we were waiting for the union. They didn't come to organize us. We were ready. We were just waiting for somebody to say, we can do this, and we follow, basically. So 1970, we get on the strike. This was my first step to go on strike. My father and one brother at that time, we went on a strike in Salinas. I used to work for Mero Farms. And we were on a strike, yes, we call it huelga loca strike, crazy strike, because yes, people was walking outside of the fields and going on a strike. And then we start, of course, before that we have some meetings, and when Cesar Chavez was organized in 1970, then we went on a strike, and actually 1966, 67, the company, fired out my father and me. My father was one of the braceros for that company. Yes, unfairly, they fired us. And I couldn't believe it. It was unfair. Then we moved to another labor camp where I met my wife, Rebecca, who's here. Por favor, te paras. I met in the field my wife for more than 40 years now. And and then from that time I stopped getting in the struggle, and I saw the movement for me an opportunity to do something else. So voluntarily I started volunteering and working on the union contract, because finally they signed a contract and I got a job in a union contract. So I started developing my skills in organizing and volunteering after working the fields, volunteering the union, organizing other people outside, participating in march, boycotts, Gallo wine boycott, marches in San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles, volunteering everywhere. So this is basically I'm keeping doing now in my organization that I started in 1990, Center for Community Advocacy, to promote and to help farm workers to improve affordable housing and promote affordable housing and improve health in our community in Monterey County, in South Santa Cruz County, Pájaro Valley area. I think so. That's it. Thank you.
Well, I'm the guy with all the hair. That picture was taken on July 15th, 1969. The car belongs to two federal marshals who had come up to my home up at the top of Page Mill Road behind campus here and arrested me to begin serving a 3-year sentence for a willful act of refusal to submit to a lawful order of induction. And that moment had really begun 3 years earlier, in 1966, right after I had been elected student body president here in one of the more improbable, unrecognizable events in Stanford history. We've yet to explain how that happened, but Suddenly there was this radical who was in Levi's and work shirts and the uniform of the movement at the time, who was Stanford student body president. And at that point I had already solved the political question of what was up with the war in Vietnam. There was nothing there for American democracy. This was a betrayal of everything that the country stood for. And ultimately it was a war that killed more than 2 million people for no good reason. There was no good reason in 1966, there was no good reason in 1969, there was no good reason in 1971, and today there is still no good reason. It was a crime. It was a crime against everything we were supposed to be and everything that humanity demands of us. So the only question left for me in 1966 was, what was I going to do about it? I knew what I felt. And I was looking, like all young men in America in those days, I was looking down the barrel of the military conscription system. Judging by my eyeball test, most here are in the demographic where they remembered the draft. But for those of you who don't, in brief summary, at age 18, every male was supposed to go down to the post office and register with the government, at which point they would give you a draft card to prove that you had indeed registered as required by law. You were, according to the law, required to keep that card in your possession at all times, subject to 5 years in prison if you weren't. It was also 5 years in prison if you refused the orders that they eventually gave you. It was also 5 years in prison for every occasion on which you urged anybody else to violate the Selective Service Act. By my unofficial accounting, ultimately, I owed them about 5,000 years on all that stuff. But at that moment in 1966, it's hard for me to believe, because it's become, I am so used to having done this, that it's hard to believe that there was really any question that I was going to do it. But there certainly was at that time. And my reasoning ultimately was pretty simple. There is no such thing as a bystander. You're either in with one or you're in with the other. And to stay passive is simply to establish the status quo. And the status quo in those days was not that they wanted Stanford students to go off and fight the war. They had plenty of poor people that they were drafting to do that. They just needed Stanford students to keep following orders, keep that draft card in their pocket, keep making the whole system hold together because everybody obeyed it. And somebody had to break that cycle of obedience. And ultimately that was a test not just about politics or policy. It was really a question of, who are you? And I wasn't going to be someone who sat by and let 2 million people be killed for no good reason. I was not going to do that. So I put my draft card in an envelope with a letter to my local draft board who administered this system, and with a note saying, I will never carry this or obey your orders as long as there are American troops in Southeast Asia. For the next 2 years after that, I traveled pretty much incessantly around the United States, and particularly around the western United States, trying to find people who would do the same, and advocating at every opportunity that they go out and do so. I suppose I must have given about 1,000 speeches over the course of those 2 years. It's hard to remember now, but always was the feeling that there comes a moment in time when you have to ante up. And if you don't ante up, it's all bullshit. And it was time for Americans to ante up. Not when they were faced with some evil oppressor from across the seas. You know, Hannah Arendt, the German philosopher, in her book about Eichmann got it right, which was, the real question was not, what do you do about the Germans? The real question was, what do you do if you're a German? That was the question that my generation had to answer. And the answer is you throw yourselves on the cog of the machine. You make it as hard as you can for that machine that was grinding its way through Southeast Asia to function. And you try to make it as clear as you can to the rest of the citizens around you that they have to do the same, that there is no looking the other way. And that's what got me to this moment. What's not in the picture is back up this way is my wife, who was 4 months pregnant at the time. My son was born 5 months after I went to the joint. I got to see him for the first 15 months of his life once a month in a prison visiting yard. My dog was up there too. He ran off. And down this way was San Francisco County Jail, where they took me. I spent a month in San Francisco County Jail, where I was one of the organizers of the strike. I spent the next 7 months in a federal prison camp in Arizona, where I organized 3 strikes. I spent the next 12 months in a maximum security institution in West Texas, where I didn't organize any strikes, but I spent 4 months in isolation cells, and the rest of my time in maximum security. And then I got out and I continued to do the same until the war was finished and the peace agreements had been signed. And now, 45 years later or so, at that time, you know, I was doing what I was doing because I wanted to reach the age of 68 and feel good about what I had done when I was 23. And I'm 68, he's 23, and I still am right with him.
Well, amen, amen, amen. That's really all we have planned. The floor is open. There are a couple of microphones on either side, and so we welcome your questions. And in the interest of trying to ensure that as many people get to speak as possible, please try to keep them as concise as you can. Just raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. And if you're comfortable doing so, it'd be nice to identify yourself. I'm sure we'd be interested to know.
I'm Ken Lyons. I'm a librarian at UC Santa Cruz, and this is a question for Mr. Harris. I just wondered what, you said you organized strikes in jail and prison. What was the general reception to your political attitude by the prisoners there?
Well, there's always, you know, a set of guys with death before dishonor tattooed on the forehead who wanted nothing to do with a bunch of hippies. After that, everybody's convict together. You know, we weren't striking over whether to elect Richard Nixon. We were striking over what kind of food was down in the chow hall and what kind of medical care was available to prisoners. And draft prisoners in the federal prison system very quickly got a reputation for being stand-up convicts. We didn't talk to the man. We stood up when it was time to get down. We were there, and so we had no problems. I mean, we were just part of the prison scene with lots of friends. And every night on the prison basketball court, we had a game hippies against the Indians. And, our bona fides were pretty clear, and word gets around in those situations. And as a consequence, I never had any problems with any other convicts.
Did you get onto political organizing in there at all? Or?
Well, nobody had any doubts what I was in there for, and I was not ashamed to say so. But the political organizing there is in prison is the politics of prison, which is are they beating you up when you walk down the hall, or are they feeding you the food you're supposed to get, or are they handing it out to the guards out the back of the chow hall, so you got to eat bread instead of hamburger, One of our strikes was after, the prison hospital was manned by a medical technician's assistant, who was legally qualified to check between toes at a public swimming pool. And we had at that time in the federal prison system, anyone arrested on immigration crimes was subject to incarceration. So there were a lot of Mexicans in the federal prison system, particularly in the Southwest, who were in there for having crossed the border. The first time they give you 6 months, second time a year, third time 2 years, on up the ladder. And one of these Mexicans who didn't speak English had an epileptic fit, and this MTA strapped him to a gurney for the entire time he was having the fit. And the next day we went out on strike and said, get that quack out of here. So those were the kind of issues you organize around in prison.
Okay.
Thanks.
My name is Tatanka Kitbricka, and fellow drafters there with David, and I was organizer of the grape and lettuce boycotts in the Bay Area at 6970 when you were out on the strike in Salinas. The movement was our rites of passage as young men. Today, farm workers at the bottom end of the totem pole, young black men are being arrested and killed at alarming rates in prison, and we have an ongoing war going on. And 3 months ago I walked into my post office and there's a little sign there, 5 years in prison unless you go down and register for the draft. So comments about the present situation, about how these moments captured by Bob Fitch beautifully on film give you the insight and courage to do what we need to do today, and any comment at all about what's going on today for any of you.
Go for it, Reverend.
I'm listening. Someone else start.
Let the Reverend go.
Here we go.
Well, today is perhaps a bit more complex than the day when we served in the 60s. But I think what probably moved all of us is the spirit, the courage, the faith to get involved. And I heard Ambassador Andrew Young say that people would come up to him later on and say, I wish I'd been a part of the movement. And Andy said, he would say, why weren't you? There was no fee involved. All you had to do was just get in. And I think we need somebody speaking and organizing and moving so others can come. One person got to make that stand, like the first lady of the movement, Miss Rosa Parks. Nobody, Dr. King was not involved in that. Nobody told her to do that, but the strength inside of her. And when she made that move, then others got involved. The Union man, Ed Nixon, after Ed Nixon got involved, Ralph Abernathy, the longtime pastor in Montgomery, got involved. Ralph got the new pastor, Martin Luther King Jr., involved because he was not politically tainted yet to be involved. So somebody needs to take a stand, and please don't call on us. Let us be the elders, please.
Anyone else on that?
The question is related to farm workers or?
Yeah, farm workers today. Yes.
Well, I feel the movement, the strength of the movement, I think, were the 70s. I worked in the field for about 20 years, and I think I have the best time in the movement from the 1970s to 80s 84. And when the company closed down, so I lose my job and everything. Then I think so the farm workers, the best time for the farm workers in the movement, I think the best years were the 70s and 80s. And I think so 1979 we were on a strike for 8 months. And I think so we signed the best contract of the history, because we jumped for an hour from $3 per hour to 5. We made a big jump in that strike. And we signed the best contract of the history of the union. And then we felt that we really advanced a lot, because we reached to the level to have vacations, pension plan, medical plan, holidays. So really, I think so I was really proud to be part of that movement. And I think so we went doing really good. I felt and I feel very proud to be part of that time. But after the 80s, the situation of the farm workers slowly been down and down. And 1983, I was making close to, I was making $650, 1984. Now, because the minimum wage was raised, they're making a little more, but they've been at $7 and $8 per hour since those years. There's been nothing happened. We don't have so many union contracts there in Salinas Valley. It's not any more movement like used to be before. Suddenly, I feel not good, but it is the truth. So it's a lot of, the situation I think is worse, because cost of living is rising and everything, and it's not so many union in the fields. There's signed a few contracts there, Teamsters and UFW, but it's not so much. I don't see nothing and other than that, and the situation I think so we are worse now.
Thank you. Any comments, David, about the wars today?
Well, they look awful familiar, don't they? The one thing I will say is that they're at least being done with quote volunteers. They're not being done with conscripts. I mean, can you imagine if George W. Bush had had a conscript army? Katie barred the door. I mean, God knows who all we would have invaded. But I think it's important to remember a couple things looking back on it all. First, things were accomplished. There's no Jim Crow.
No.
There's discrimination, but there's not Jim Crow anymore.
No legal.
And there's not a conscription system anymore. And they aren't still fighting in Vietnam, I know that. And certainly the Mexican Americans have a standing that they never had when I was growing. I grew up in Fresno, and I worked packing sheds in the summer. And so all those things were real accomplishments. Second thing we should remember is that there's been a concerted effort to make sure that whatever lessons got learned in the 60s didn't get passed on.
Yes.
I mean, you know, we are dealt with as a contagious disease. You know, and if I had $1 for every time they say, the Republicans say Vietnam syndrome, I mean, you know, they don't want people to do what they learned how to do in the 1960s. So it's treated as a kind of black hole out there, and nobody teaches it. Or not nobody, but it's very rarely taught with any kind of standing in school systems around the country. So you know, we've lost touch with a lot of the lessons that were there. And I'm with the Reverend. Where are you guys? Stand up. Next generation, yes. You know, next man up. It's time. And this generation of, you know, of 23-year-olds they're staring down the barrel of something far worse than what we do.
Oh, yes.
Climate change is going to be the ugliest thing that has ever happened to humankind. And the only antidote to it is going to be people seizing control of their democracy and making it work in ways that it's never worked so far.
If you take note, all of us here put it all on the line. And you have to be prepared to do that. I mean, Bob knew what he was faced with. Brother Harris, all of us, and we knew that we had to put it all on the line. And I think young people have to realize that it's not where you go out and have a little fun and come back and be yourself again. Just go out, you get a job done. If it takes 6 months, 6 years, 30 years, you get it done. And be prepared to give it all, if you have to get it all. I'm taken aback by the violence and the deep, dependent love for guns and weapons, and how we're passing that on to kids, and they're getting younger with guns in their pockets. And I think the rich and the powerful has got to come out, or we got to make them come out, not we, you. Got to make them come out and take the right positions on these kind of things, and head it off, because it's really headed down a bad road. Sandy Hook, for example. I thought that this country would rise up and look seriously at guns, and kind of put some kind of control on guns. And it's not going to be easy for you and me to talk about it. The powerful, those who know how to make things happen, those who know how to do the PR, those who know how to persuade people and use their power and their influence to change people away from this kind of stuff. Ferguson, Missouri, embarrassed us everywhere in the world. These people with all these monstrous weapons pointed down at their own citizens was shameful. And we've come to a bad place, and I hate the kind of violence I see in the land today.
Just to complete your question, the farm workers where I work and we organize, we did a survey, they're making about 8,000 to 14,000 per year individually, 15,000. So what happened, the couple has to work, and once their sons grow up, they can work, immediately they join the workforce. So this is the situation, just in general, just to help my information about the situation of the farm workers in Salinas. And everywhere, I think so. Thank you.
If I may, please, Bob, Marta Rodriguez. I'm Marta Rodriguez, Bob. I didn't know that the pictures existed during the farm worker movement where I was beaten by cops. Thank you. You're all heroes. We're all heroes. And everybody that is here, that's been part of the past and is the present, we're all heroes to the future generation. As a farm worker, as a child, where there were no labor laws, I worked there. I was there. During the time of the strikes, I was there. I was beaten by cops. And to this day, in Kern County, it is the most racist, the most discriminated county in the state of California. And I have not given up. And I'm still working on environmental issues for justice for children of the farm workers that are still being born with birth defects. 151 infants died within a 10-year period that the county and the state health department covered it up, not including the continuous cancers among children. 9-year-old little girls who have breast cancer, ovarian tumors, and it goes on and on. And I'm not giving up. And you can't give up. None of you can give up. You're still the backbone of the power of history that goes along on my side. You are all heroes. And a hero that's not here is Mick Harrison, an attorney And another one, Stephen Dennison Smith, who's from Alexandria, Virginia. Mick Harrison's from Indiana, who has flown in to help me. Every time they want to make arrests, or every time they want to accuse me for whatever I'm labeled as a communist. And I know what y'all have been to, what you've all gone through, what the union has gone through, because I was there as a child. I was taken out from the 5th grade because I spoke both languages to translate in Cecil Avenue School and Delano High School, English for the Mexicanos who could not speak English. I was taken out from the 5th grade to translate when the welfare department opened, to translate for the Mexicanos, the African Americans who could not read or write. I was always taken out of school, and I would feel so disappointed because my grades were always so low. How could you think, how can you get an A when they're always taking you out and everybody depends on you, and then you have to go work in the fields, and all you're taught is by your teachers? You don't need an education. Farm workers don't need an education. And it goes on, and it's still existing. There is not enough housing for farm workers. Get a gallon of milk. I'll tell you, I've seen farm workers get 1 gallon of milk where they pour it into another empty gallon to have 2 gallons of milk to say it's okay. We're not hungry. They are hungry. Everybody's hungry. And agriculture in California keeps growing and growing and growing. The death rate among Mexicanos, the poor black people, the poor white people in these poor rural communities are dying. We're here, we're great, this is great, but we all got work to do. It's not going to end. And yes, what needs to be done, and I'm going to tell all of you, with the guns issues, we need to find out who's got these contracts to build the guns. Who is selling them to who? Because when you start finding out who's got these contracts and who's selling it and who's giving the power, it's going to be shameful for America. And we got to start getting these kids to get off these computers, off these telephones, these games that are so violent, that TV is so violent. All these, even Latina women, they're so dressed, practically naked on TV. And sex is so much on TV that they think sex is great when there's all diseases passing through. There's a lot of things that need to be changed. And I think everybody here can make changes at home. As I learned, my brother had taught me, no matter how many times the police knocked us down, no matter how many times they try to arrest us, just stand up and be proud and just keep moving. And that's what we all need to do. We all need to help. Everybody needs help. Please.
Historical interest to those of us here at Stanford, and selfishly for me as former resident fellow with the freshman dorm Rinconada House at Wilbur Hall. Is it true that when you were here at Stanford, you were a resident assistant in Rinconada House, and during that time that Mitt Romney was one of your freshman students? And if so, how did that go?
Well, first, for a historical note, they didn't call them RAs then. At Wilbur Hall, which was all freshmen men, the upperclassmen on each floor in the dormitories were called sponsors. And unlike today's RA system, the sponsors were the only self-selecting student group with power on the whole campus. One year's sponsors selected the next year's sponsors, and the administration had no role in that. And when I was there, we were in the midst of a giant conflict with the administration because they were trying to regain the control over the sponsors, and the sponsors were threatening to take Wilbur Hall out on strike if they did. But yes, Mitt Romney was in my dormitory, and you know, I had forgotten this completely until I got a call from somebody from the Boston Globe saying, we understand that Mitt Romney once borrowed some clothes from you so he could go spy on the Berkeley campus without seeming conspicuous. I thought, whoa. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I guess he was around. Yeah. I have zero memory of Mitt Romney. I have only his stories to authenticate our relationship. But as I remember being briefed before this freshman arrived that his father was kind of the leading Republican candidate for president at that moment in time. And we were, warned that he was coming. And after that, he just kind of disappeared in this, Beta jacket, penny loafer morass. He did show up right after I was elected student body president. The first thing that happened on campus was there was a sit-in at the president's office because at that time the selective service system had decided that in giving out student deferments, for those of you who've forgotten, if you were making progress towards a degree at a university, you were deferred from being called into the Army for as long as you were studying. And the question in 1966 was that they were upping draft calls. I mean, the casualties had started really piling up at this point. We had been in the shit for about a year, seriously, with American combat troops at that point. They needed to get more draftees, so they decided the selective service system was going to take control over the question of who was making a reasonable progress towards a degree. And so that they wrote a test which they were going to administer to everybody who wanted a student deferment that would prove whether or not they were making reasonable progress to a degree. So, needless to say, the thought that Stanford was going to cooperate with this test, they were going to, they gave them a hall to give the goddamn test in. And so, our question was, well, who are you to allow somebody else to determine what reasonable progress is towards a Stanford degree? And what is the university doing helping out this machine in the first place? And after the sit-in, which lasted for, basically like 24 hours, then right as the sit-in was breaking up, Mitt Romney showed up down in front of the bookstore. The sit-in was down at the president's office in the Quad. He showed up with a group of young Republicans in front of the bookstore, saying bad things about people who would sit into the president's office, et cetera, et cetera. And that was my last vision of Mitt Romney until the Boston Globe called and told me that I had a history with this guy.
Coyle, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I met Bob Fitch 15 years ago when I got to go to his house and look at his amazing photographs of the farm worker movement for a film that Rick Tejada Flores was making called The Fight in the Fields. I remember those Stanford days a little bit because I was not in college. I was in junior high or high school, and a family friend was a student here who got arrested and did 30 days in jail for those protests, and my mother used to bake cookies and take them down to the jail for him. So, just something to say about all the people who have stepped up and did step up then in their very own ways. I do remember my mom coming home one day and saying that she had been down in San Jose at San Jose State University College at the time, protesting the war in Vietnam, pushing my baby sister in a stroller, and that the president of the college came up to her and said, "Do you know that you are the only housewife who is out here protesting with these students?" And she said, "So be it." But anyway, the reason I stood up was because I actually want to ask the library a question about, and Bob, a question about access. And I think it'd be really wonderful, Bob, if you could speak a little bit about the choice that you made to make your collection so widely available. And I'd like to also hear from Stanford what it's prepared to do to reach out to the community college system, the state university system, all the public colleges and universities in this country who are seriously underfunded. I spent 2 weeks at Wayne State University in Detroit last year. They are deeply impacted by the by the bankruptcy of the city. They have no money to run their archive. They had one quarter-inch machine running. They have the most important labor archive in the country. And I think all of us need to put our heads together to understand that we have a responsibility to our students who are struggling their way through the public community college system and the state university system, that an incredible treasure like this archive should really attract, should be a magnet to bring them here, to be able to learn how to do their work here and to have the opportunity to do their work here. We need to build those bridges. I feel really passionate about that as somebody who's spent the last 20 years doing archival research, including many days at this wonderful archive. So, yeah, I guess I just gave a tirade instead of asking a question. But, Bob.
Well, no one whose photo I ever took asked me to pay them. They trusted me to tell the story of their life. An enormous gift. I wanted to be sure that as my photos entered, some of them anyway, the arena of heritage, they were not the cause of escalating print fees. And it simply occurred to me it would be nice to have an archive where on the web I could expose 3,000 to 5,000 of the principal historical and folk style images for free download. So that's an edited group of images, not all of them, just the most important historical ones. And the balance of images would be preserved for access by researchers who could find them because I had some index. So it was a real choice. It was a thanks to the people who trusted me with their lives. And it was a desire to see that not enter the commercial arena. And Stanford has not only said yes, they have the capacity. It takes to scan and place 5,000 images takes a large enterprise. So does that kind of answer the question? That's our arrangement. I'm now in the process. Statements. There's a lot of heart in the team at Stanford. Roberto, Ben, Becky, Peter, the digital, Ignacio, who is working as a PR man for Alejo, who introduced my work to Stanford. There's a lot of heart in that team. Also, I'm supported by my son, Dan, where are you? There we go. My sweetheart, Karen Shaver, has been an enormous help. And many people who have been photographed are helping me caption all these images. So once again, it's us. Once again, it's a team. So there'll be, I'd say, about 3 months, you'll be able to go to the Stanford Special Collections and see most of these images.
A question, because the other part of this, I mean, I hate to break this up, but all these photos are downstairs and they're really awesome. So I want to make sure we have time to get down there. So why don't we take one more and then we'll thank our speakers. Christian.
Hi, my name is Christian Davis Bailey and I just graduated from Stanford in June. am a journalist and activist on campus with issues in Detroit, in Ferguson, and in Palestine. And I just wanted to say, since I seem to be one of the younger people in this room, on behalf of my generation, thank you for paving the way for us to do the work that we're doing today, because I do think my generation is prepared to pick up the mantle from you all. And that's largely due to the fact that we have professors like Clay Carson and Jim Campbell that teach us these histories, and that we are able to learn from the anti-Vietnam movement and the farm workers movement and the civil rights movement. So I don't really have a question, but I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done, and that we, in particular at Stanford, are prepared to take on this work as we move forward. Thank you.
I would like to recommend a perspective for viewing the exhibit and for meeting others tonight. Now, there are plenty of people in here who have already spoken. You want to meet them and learn about their lives and share your life and confront your commitment with their lives. So my photographs introduce you to people. Come up to the photograph, tell them their name, read their story. Inside your own head and heart you can say, this is who I am, this is my story. More important, before you leave this room, pick 2 or 3 people in the room to whom you want to introduce yourself. Hear their story and share their story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.